It's me, Russ, headed to church. I'm going to church for the first time in a long time. And of course I'm wearing my AC/DC Devilhead shirt. Why wouldn't I? Why am I doing it? I'll explain. Why am I wearing this shirt to church? To be offensive? Is that what I'm doing? Maybe I'll bring my selfie stick too. Yeah, I usually wear this shirt on Halloween, and to church. That's when I wear my AC/DC shirt. My Devilhead AC/DC shirt. Headed off to church. What? What, Russ? What's going on? I did this review of the Amy Winehouse remixes record and the Pink Vinyl record. Talked about some of my story as a recovered addict myself, and touched on the fact that there are spiritual communities, or even religious communities, if you want to use that word. I don't like that word. I'll go into why. But people who can gather around you and walk life with you, right? Like, life is hard to do alone, but it's hard to trust people, right? Like, who do you trust? And especially when it comes to religious people, right? I've been to a lot of recovery groups in the basements of churches. You know, for me, that's where use this word worship. For me, all right, my understanding of that word, you go into the Bible and it says, you know, the pouring out of your life. If your life is like a glass or a pitcher of liquid, and you pour it out onto different things, like if you're watering plants or grass or pouring it on the ground or whatever you do with your life, that's worship, all right? It's not the flippin' music at church. It just drives me nuts the way some of this, it triggers me, you know? The way some people, was worship great today? What, you mean the music at church? That's all right. Is that worship? No, not in my definition anyway, just from my own life experience and the troubles and trials that I've been through, choosing to be alive, to do fun stuff. That's part of why this channel exists, is that I was not voted most likely to succeed in high school, right? Like, I didn't even finish high school. I quit high school because I was a drug addict at that age. So, being an adult and living with the consequences of all that, I still raised a family, worked on my own cars to keep them running so I could continue to provide. And then when I grew up, we bought a red convertible instead of whining and complaining about how we're empty nesters. Living life, doing alive people stuff. Opportunities, you get my point. Joy, beauty, peace, pain, suffering, loss. Living day in, day out, month in, month out, year in, year out, in your life. That's why people get in communities like this and do life with one another. I need some people around me, because life is freaking hard, and it's really hard to do alone by yourself. The recovery groups I went to at Mars Hill Church at the time, Mars Hill Church, all right, this is going to take some explaining. I was part of a church. I joined in 2006, my wife and I, my family, but early 2000s, the city of Seattle had this new law on all ages clubs. Speaking of music, all right, and arts. The Rock Candy was part of this, and they went down. The Rock Candy had been around forever. Nirvana had played at Rock Candy, the All Ages Club, Pearl Jam, some of these big bands that you've heard of had played at Rock Candy. Now, the city, because of different incidences and stuff, had a law that said that any All Ages Club needs to have like $100,000 worth of insurance per night in order to operate in the city, all ages music venues. So most of them closed. So one of my friends, Jeff Betker, and some other folks at the church decided, we're a church, like, we could do this. We could have music. The church is about arts and community. Let's have bands perform here. Bands that would normally perform at Rock Candy. for example. Not just Christian acts or music. That's not an all-ages club, but it's still a place where people play music. But they hired an actual concert promoter. They had, it wasn't just Christian music, all right? They had bands, Death Cab for Cutie had played there back in the day. Some other bands that you would probably recognize I don't have in front of me. But the Paradox was a huge success and a part of why this church, Mars Hill Church, was such a hit. That and the preaching by a pastor who was influenced by a film called The Fight Club, right? The whole thing went down, and there's a podcast about it, which would explain more if you're curious. He was called The Cussing Pastor in a book by called The Blue Like Jazz. That was a huge bestseller. But yeah, so for Rise and Fall of Mars Hill Church, I was there in 2006, but the recovery groups there, so you're inviting musicians and people from around the city there, and the recovery groups were huge. And I saw things like people getting off of heroin, all right? I remember a guy, one of the worst cases you could imagine, living behind a dumpster, come in and take garbage out of the church, and go back to wherever he was going. And eventually, just through kindness and people treating him well at the church and going to these Thursday night grace groups, we called them, he got off of heroin. He went to a methadone clinic. He got an apartment, got a job. And I remember, not too long before we stopped going to the Ballard location because they opened a location closer to our home, a campus. I remember, a bunch of guys praying over this guy as he's getting off methadone. And now the church is gone. Pastor misappropriated funds and it was a bully, and it was sad to see this one man take the whole thing down, because a lot of good things happen there, and the recovery groups were one of those good things. So I mentioned Mars Hill. That's what I'm speaking about. And then you get some of those relationships that are real shallow, and then you get relationships with people that you can air your stuff with, right? That won't judge you, that may actually have some helpful advice if you need it, right? I have people in my life where I have very few people that I trust enough to ask for advice, but they're in my life, and that's a blessing, right? I'm very fortunate for that, and that took time. And Mars Hill Church, man, I still have some of those relationships, and there's some people that went to that church that I still know and I still trust. So there's something to that, even though I haven't been to church in, 3 or 4 years. I am a fan of communities of safe people. But what does that look like? What kind of people are safe? Churches, I don't know. I mean, people trust churches. When a church opens up their facility to have 12-step groups, even 12-step groups, man, that's another one. Like and I talked about some of that in the Amy Winehouse uncellophaning of the Pink record, right? My own story, 12-step for me, where I lost some trust in that, is this constant kind of blaming the substance. Like, you know why your life's messed up? It's because of alcohol. That's why. Really? Like, alcohol is just another thing I reached for. I was a redundant addict. In other words, if I could escape myself and not having to live inside here with my own fears and troubles, and just not have to be. I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. So I would reach for, if it wasn't alcohol, it was speed. If it wasn't speed, it was something else. Ultimately, I had to deal with my own demons and start to get comfortable with Russ Shaw. I didn't have a good beat on who Russ Shaw was. That did not have to do with alcohol. I think blaming the substance and sure, stop drinking. It's like an idol, use that there's another theological, philosophical truth. When you idolize something, much like, what's Gollum in Lord of the Rings, you turn it into, this is my precious, I can't live without it. When you cut that thing out of your life, so yeah, stop drinking. I still drink today. I don't smoke weed. So here's a weird thing. Weed didn't really, I mean, you can't overdose on weed. I just don't smoke weed anymore. I broke up with Mary Jane. And that's how I see these things, as relationships. So I had a relationship with alcohol. I had a relationship with drugs. I had a relationship with food, music. There's a lot of good things in this world that we can turn into idols, and they can destroy us if we let them. And so that's my point about me kind of getting bristled up by this constant scapegoating of alcohol, the demon alcohol. I don't, lots of people drink. I mean, it's not a demon. And part of me is that if you give yourself that idea and let yourself be infected with it. I love that line from the film Inception. The world's worst contagious viruses. It's an idea. That idea gets lodged in the mind that I'm fine, but it's alcohol that's bad, and the life energy can still keep that idolatry as people continue to scapegoat alcohol. It's alcohol's fault that I'm this way, No, it was just something that I reached for, and quite frankly, to destroy myself and commit suicide in a very slow way. So, back to church. Why haven't I been to church since 2018? I think it was the last time I went to church. I just don't like the systematic and institutional forms of spiritual community. Anytime, in my opinion, you have a building and you have elders and deacons and hierarchy, like that stuff's not in the Bible. I think that Jesus was rebelled against that. Well, Catholics will say, well, Jesus was starting a new religion. Like, they called him rabbi. He's a Jew. Catholics paint Jesus like some white guy in a metal band, long flowing hair. He was Jewish, for crying out loud. He had brown skin and probably really curly hair. Like, this man was not a white guy, all right? So, these are some of my church issues. Now I'm trying to find a place to park. But Restoration Road, this church here that I'm attending this morning, I'm plugged into kind of addicts. I know people in my life who struggle with addiction. Still, I'm not a sponsor. I really don't believe in sponsors. I'll be your friend. Don't call me a sponsor. Like, that sounds weird. This is not, no, I'm not your authority. But yeah, I don't mind being, hey, look, there's people gathering. There's a little coffee house here. It's pretty packed. There's a lot of cars here. I'm having a hard time finding parking. But if they're doing that well, that's cool. I'll check it out. I have a friend of mine that invited me. He's like, hey, you should check this out and see what you think. Told me he was going, and I'm like, okay, I'll check it out. But I still have issues with community, spiritual community. They, qualify leaders as like the military or a corporation or something. I'm not sure that's healthy either. The word denomination is another one. The root word of denomination is diabolical. Is to dissect, to cut something into pieces and parts. So yeah, this will be fun.
One eternity later.
Okay, so just getting out of church. I got a mug. Check it out with contact information and stuff. Sat through a sermon that was too long. I don't know. It's people teaching out of the Bible, which is, it's just a guy's interpretation of what he heard. I didn't like the theology. I really didn't like the theology. As someone who's been through self-destruction and grew up with some of these Christian ideas that were damaging, in my opinion. But do they work with addicts, people that struggle with addiction. That's what I'm curious about. How do I feel after that experience? Okay, so this video's gone long. What good could I say about Redemption Road? Let me start with that. Here's a place that there's young people there, which was surprising. You see people under 30 in a church anywhere in the Seattle area. That's encouraging, right? The aesthetic was very much like Mars Hill, and it looks like some former Mars Hill leaders started the church and kicked off the church. I think I know one of them. Was in a community group with a guy's brother who started one of the churches that sprang forth from this one, which is fine. So the church is an artful place. It should be a place of the arts. It should be. Sadly, there's just a lot of rules and a lot of, micromanagement on a moralistic level that causes things like that not to happen. But I don't know. So there I go critiquing again. I'm trying to say positive things. That's what I got. And if you want to see the rest of my reaction to going to church for the first time in several years, I don't know, 4 years, is that several years? Check out Punk Theology. I'll put a in-screen link in the description when I get to it. That's another page that I do. And subscribe to it, why not? It's got like 9 subscribers now. So, and I get into a little more detail about some of my story, if that's something you're interested in, and whether or not I'm gonna turn in some information, and we'll see what Redemption Road has to say about Russ Shaw. I don't know, we'll see. Maybe I'll just do church critiques, I don't know. If you have a 12-step group, that's cool. If you invite broken people in, those are the people that Jesus liked. If I recall, his most harsh words were for religious professionals, and seriously, if you look in the Gospels, the most harsh, hardest, meanest words that Jesus ever said to anybody, it was the religious elitists. He called them whitewashed tombs, cups that are shiny clean on the outside and filthy on the inside, men of lawlessness. That was directed at a religious audience. These are guys that had memorized whole books of the Bible, who morally were like impeccable. And I'm not trying to be a punk rock, self-righteous Pharisee myself, all right? I do care about people like Amy Winehouse, right? Just getting into her story, telling her story breaks my heart. And there's so many people like that die on the streets every day. Do churches give a crap about those people more than they give a crap about their theology and all their rules and their, little church networks and stuff like that? That's what I care about. That's what I'm about, all right? So, I'll turn in some information. We'll see where it goes. I'm trying to have an open mind and an open heart, but I've got my guard up, all right? Big time with this place. So, we'll see. Thanks for watching. Don't subscribe. Don't do it. Don't subscribe to Punk Theology. That'll drag you to hellfire. That's what it'll do. Later. Bye.